But we're going to look into history. Even when you look at, say, a country like Ethiopia in Africa, and you dig into the history of Menelik I and Menelik II, you'll understand that they were descendants of King Solomon. Menelik meaning from the Melech, from Melech, from the king, from the king. But what about Egypt? What about Mitzrayim, Egypt? What about Egypt? The pharaohs were black. They weren't white. They were black. Egypt is Mitzrayim, and it means burnt face or black. The ancients referred to their country as Kemet, Kemet, which has been written in a variety of ways, Kemet, Kemit, Kem, Al-Kem, and it literally means the black land, or the land of the blacks, Mitzrayim. How did Moshe Rabbeinu go undetected for 40 years if he was a Caucasian in the land of the black faces? How did he go undetected for 40 years? How did Joseph's brothers not recognize him in the land of the black faces if he was a white man? Can you tell me that? Noah called his son Ham, Ham, in the Hebrew, Ham, Chet Mem Sofit, and it means hot, hot. Kemet and Ham are the same words in the Hebrew, which represented the coloring of the people of Mitzrayim, Egypt. What happens if something stays hot for a long time? It burns and turns black, right? So you start to look at the scriptures and you start to see that we serve an Elohim that delivers people from slavery. And then I get sick and tired of what's been going on in the run-up to these elections. And coming from England, where I see things so different in this country because I come from outside and come into it. And I see all the fermentation. And it really troubles me. But the scripture and historical truth is what will set us free. Amen. But democracy is designed to enslave you. It was invented by the Greeks, and we understand from the scriptures who was sold to the Greeks. Joel speaks about that. In Exodus chapter 2, Shemot chapter 2, verse 19, Moshe was described as a Mitzri, which means a blackface, from the land of the blacks. They didn't say that he was a Mitzri Laban, a Mitzri Laban. What was Laban? Remember Laban? He was an albino, He was white, an albino. And you can see that in Africa today. There are albinos. But he would have been described, if he was white, as a Mitzri Laban. But he wasn't. Which would have meant he was an albino African. But he wasn't. Just like Yaakov's uncle was an albino. You see, the ancient Egyptians were a Kemetic people. They were black. In 1965, the former president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, said he couldn't respect the present Jews in Israel because they left Israel black and they came back white because they were Caucasians when they returned, a Turkic Mongol Asians from the Caucasus Mountains, the Russian steppes. Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5. I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. I am black. The Hebrew word there is shachar ha-anya. It literally translates to, I am dark-skinned. Strong's number, and I don't use Strong's numbers very often, but there's going to be pushback. Strong's number 7838, shachar, from Strong's number 7838. 35, dusky. So the word shachar means dusky. And if you look in the concise Oxford English Dictionary in the 10th edition, dusky means darkish in color, euphemistic of a person black and dark-skinned. And in the Old English Dictionary, it says tending to blackness. Song of Solomon's 5, verse 11. His head is as the most pure gold, meaning it's royal, it's regal, he's kingly, he's wearing a crown. His locks are curly and as black as raven. King Solomon, Melech Shlomo, was black. And only blacks have locks, not Caucasians, no matter what Rapunzel or what was the other one? Goldilocks would say, right? Look at Bathsheba in the Hebrew. Bet Tav Shin Bet Ain, daughter of Sheba. She was the black daughter of Sheba, whose line goes back to Sheba, who was the son of Cush. Cush, who produced the Nilotic black races. Look at this, Bereshit, Genesis chapter 10, verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush and Mitzrayim and Put and Canaan, and the sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Savta, Ramah, Savtecha, and the sons of Ramah, Sheba and Dedan. And now you're going to say, well, if that's true of Solomon, what about Melech David? What about King David? We know that he was an Anglo because he had ruddy skin, right? Isn't that what the scripture says? Of course. He was Caucasian. No. 1 Samuel 17, verse 42. And when the Philistine looked out and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and of fair countenance. And then you can just move on. But I just don't want to move on. Because when you look at the Hebrew for ruddy is Adomi. Adomi, and it's spelled Aleph, Dalet, Mem, Nun, Yod. And it means reddish black, as in reddish black soil. The reddish black soil connected to the land. And if you don't believe that, Genesis chapter 4, verse 10, Bereshit 4:10, and he said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's dam, blood, cries out to me from the ground. So now here we've got the wordplay. Dam is blood, Adamah is ground, Adomi is ruddy. We're talking mahogany in color, reddish black. Malcolm X, what was his nickname? Red. Detroit Red. Why? Because he was ruddy in his appearance. He was called Detroit Red. He was mahogany ruddy in appearance. So we have to dig in further, because if King David was an Ashkenazi, white Jew with a reddish complexion, he would have been described as Laban, an albino, but he wasn't. So King David looked more like Malcolm X than he did King Henry VIII, right? But I mean, the DVDs we give our children, right? Oh my goodness, like you were saying, the Israelites have British accents, right? My goodness, it's outrageous. But look at ancient Egypt hieroglyphics, and they are ruddy. The Egyptians have got ruddy black skin, mahogany skin, reddish black complexions. You see, one of King Solomon's sons was later taken to Ethiopia by the Queen of Sheba, whose son had descendants reigning in Ethiopia until when? Until the Ashkenazi, those who say they are Jews and are not, came in and dethroned Haile Selassie in 1974. And that's where we get the Rasta movement, of course, from Ethiopia. Because then, after they dethroned Haile Selassie in 1974, then who did they bring in 1984 to get rid of any of those connected back to biblical Israel? Of course, they bring in Sir Bob Geldof a decade later with his Live Aid migration moving of people for the Ashkenazi communists, and moves everybody from the plateaus into the Live Aid feeding camps underneath Ashkenazi communist control. We already spoke about that earlier at Sukkot. Even the Ethiopian Jews, they're called the Falashas, meaning those that are black. Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 10. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshippers, the daughters, my dispersed ones. That's the Queen of Sheba and her sons migrated and dispersed to Ethiopia. Lamentations chapter 4 verse 2. The precious sons of Zion are comparable to fine gold. Verse 8, their visage is blacker than coal. And the concise Oxford English Dictionary, the 10th edition, tells us that visage is a poetic literary of a person's face with reference to the form of their features. A person's facial expression is what? Blacker than coal. You start to connect the language and you start to see. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 9, verse 27. We have got the Ashkenazi sons of Japheth that have infiltrated into the land and are what? They've got the whole world convinced. The whole world convinced that they are sons of Shem. But look what it says in Bereshit chapter 9, verse 27. It actually tells you that Yahweh, who is omnipotent, it is his will because he has actually deceived them into doing this. They are so deceived into doing this. Look at Genesis 9, 27. Elohim will entice and deceive. The Hebrew word there is patah. Patah. He will deceive Japheth, Ashkenaz, the sons of Japheth, and he will dwell, that means Ashkenaz will dwell in the tents of the Shemites. Is that what's happening today? Has he deceived the Ashkenazi so much, those from the Russian steppes, the Caucasians, he's deceived them so much that they're actually dwelling in the place where the real Shemites should dwell? Genesis 9, verse 27. You see, Yahweh is the one that has deceived. He has enticed Japheth. Patah, deceived, enticed. He's deceived and enticed the Ashkenazi Jews into believing that they're the Jews, and they've built the Zionist state of Israel today, which is occupying what? Our whole political platform. You don't know where the money is coming for Hillary Clinton? Where do you think it's coming from? The Ashkenazi slavers. That's where all this political money is coming from. And you don't think it's important for us to know this right before the elections, what's going on. Because they're going to try and enslave people even more. And we have to be aware of it. Because what's happened is the Ashkenazi are in fact occupying the tents of Shem, the real Shemites. Shem's not there. It's the Zionist occupiers that are there. Look at Job chapter 12, verse 18. The deceived and the deceiver are Yahweh's. Because some people are going to get all upset because you said, well, Yahweh deceived. He wouldn't deceive. Well, the scripture tells us that he does. Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 7. Yahweh, you deceive me, and I was deceived. Because there's a riddle, right? And we all know the riddle. I love the riddle. I love to do the riddle on my children. Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweet, right? What is sweeter than honey and what's stronger than a lion? And we know this from Shimshon, Samson, and Delilah. And she got hold of the riddle, did she not? Deceitfully. And Delilah made Shimshon, Samson, sleep upon her knees. And she called for a man. And she caused him to shave off the 7 locks off his head. And she began to afflict him. And his strength went from him. You see, Samson was the first Rasta. He was a Negro lion fighter, similar to the African Maasai tribe. Judges 14:5 and 16:19. You see, Samson tore a lion apart as he would a young goat. And as a Nazarite, he wore 7 dreadlocks. He was mahogany in body color, just like Malcolm X. And his visage was blacker than coal. He was a Negro. Lamentations 4, 7, and 8. And this is really hard for people to see in Scripture, because predominantly it has been the Caucasians that have been in charge of the Scriptures, right? For millennia. Lamentations 5:10. Our skin was black like an oven. Job 30, verse 30. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat. Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. And Yahweh shall bring you into Mitzrayim, Egypt again, with ships. And the way of which I said to you, you shall see it no more again. And there you shall be sold to your enemies for slaves and female slaves, and no man shall buy you. And that is what happened to the regal class of the house of Judah. And I want to give you a brief history. I won't go into it too much, but I can't just make that statement because there'll be people that will push back. But I want to give you a brief history on slavery. I was just amazed, I got to tell you. I mean, when you come to America and you talk to people about slavery, you can talk to black people about slavery, white people about slavery, and they'll give you all this history on slavery, and it only goes back to the 16th and the 17th century. And you're like, don't they teach you the history of slavery? Why? Ask the bloody question. Why are they only teaching you the history of slavery as far back as the 16th and the 17th century? Why are they only going that far back? Because they don't want you to go farther back than that, because then you'll actually find out the truth. But from the 16th and 17th century, we'll teach you about slavery. You've got to go further back, and you've got to understand and question, why do they do this throughout the whole of America in all the public schools? Why do they only go back as far as the 16th and the 17th century to talk about slavery? We've got to go further back than that.